Everyone knows their names. Legends about their deeds were passed from mouth to mouth and made into epics. People still tell bedtime stories to their children about them. They are the defenders of their country, batyrs. But what do we really know about them? What was their code of honor? In what ways were they different from ordinary people? When did the last of them live? Real history is always different from childhood fairy tales. Today we will try to understand what secrets shroud batyrs. What is batyr? I imagine a horseman with a shield, a sword, and a bow, watching rigorously ahead, riding with the spear towards the enemy. Now, I'm sure that's how most people see batyrs. Also, everyone knows that batyrs lived on Kazakh land a long time ago. But what if I told you that one of the great batyrs actually was our contemporary? But not everyone knows his name. I'm Daniel Besedin, and today we're going to be searching for mystery of the last Kazakh Batyr. Epic feats and tremendous strength that made them legendary. A Kazakh warrior cut the enemy in half up to the saddle with his sword. When did the last Kazakh Batyr live? He could be compared to Che Guevara. He was the same type of fighter. Why did they hide entire chapters of history from people? It was politically motivated and denied a lifetime of an important political figure. It was classified information, but now it's coming out. The memory of the people can't be erased by restrictions. As a human being, he was a real batyr. He was a successor of the heroic batyr civilization. Usually the title batyr was given to people who distinguished themselves in wars, to warriors who have proven their courage, determination, strength, and other qualities that were important for a fighter. The military achievements of the Kazakh batyrs have been praised by the people for centuries. Batyrs had their own culture, art, ideology, moral code, customs, and traditions. Jibek Joly is a stuntman and coordinator of battle and historical scenes. He knows about batyrs more than anyone else. To make his work as authentic as possible, he carefully studies every historical period, each character, and details of each social group, especially the batyrs. We have a wrong attitude towards batyrs. We think that they must be huge, they must be a byword of a might. Actually, it's nothing like that. As much as I studied them, batyrs were not like that. Usually a batyr was of medium height, however, they were very smart and brave. They could lead a squad or a posse, and people trusted them. That stereotypes must be destroyed. People who were the most courageous and intelligent, who knew how to negotiate with anyone, they were great strategists. If you look up the dictionary, you'll actually find dozens of definitions of this word, from an honorary title in Mongolian or Turkic people to geographical names in different parts of this planet. However, those who gave our hero the name Batyr had a slightly different meaning. Of course, strong muscles and wide shoulders, height and courage, very virile qualities. But as it turns out, to become a batyr, they were not the most significant. They used to draw them in textbooks as big and strong men. However, large people typically are not very flexible. Yes, they're generally strong, but they aren't fast. Tall people were primarily tacticians. They didn't get involved in the war. They relied on their tactics. Courage, intelligence, and tactics define a batyr. UNESCO expert on intangible cultural heritage, candidate of sciences and social anthropologist Efratim Ambek believes that the concept of batyrism was much more widespread. Let's take the knightly code of chivalry. This worship in Europe was in fact the code of the Asian batyrs, our region. It was when batyrs literally arrived. Batyrs came and they transformed into knights. Adil Batyr of Attila, as they call him in Europe. This culture replaced the Roman Empire with a totally different code. There are very different and often conflicting views in the scientific world on this matter. But the fact that the civilizations of Central Asia had a huge impact on Europe is indisputable. Now, how do we know all the heroic acts that Batyrs committed centuries ago? The epic poems is the only source of information. This is the type of oral folk art, such as songs, tales, and legends. Something that has been passed on from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, in order to preserve the memory of the great sons of Kazakh land. Many Batyrs died in battles, still young and in their prime. However, those who survived the wars and conflicts and lived until old age often became bees. People elected them as some sort of local leader of a clan, region, or village. The name of the Batyr after his death often turned into a war cry, Uran. According to one of the versions, the modern hooray actually originated from it. Most of the Kazakh war crimes were just the names of the Batyrs. The Kazakh warriors believed that if they screamed those names during the attack, the spirit of the Batyr would come and help them fight. At that point, the Batyrs were political figures. For instance, Abulai was not only a Han, he was a Batyr. In single combat, he defeated Jujungar Batyr. You had to be physically strong, as the battle could last from dawn to dusk. Kazakh people have an expression, beskaru. Every Kazakh should know that beskaru means 5 types of weapons. The traditional types of weapons were bow with arrows, sword or saber, ibalta, a battle hatchet, dagger, and other weaponry that the Batyr chose for himself. Murat Abdirov, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor, Chief Researcher of the Institute of History and Ethnology, named after Walykhanov, shared with us detailed information on the subject. Shokpar is a club, or a katkel. It has a big ball on the handle for close combat. These were the traditional beskaru of Kazakh people. Each Kazakh had to carry these 5 types of weapons. But they were very skilled at these types of weapons. They were sent out to fight. It was the duel in the beginning of the battle. And only a skilled and experienced, well-armed and well-trained Batyr went out to duel against the enemy. If in a battle, a Kazakh warrior, so to say, cut the enemy in half after the settle with his sword, this was the ultimate art, heroism and skill. Of course, these were rare, but they did occur. If we talk about the Turkic Kaghanate, and that's roughly the middle of the first millennia AD, the Batyrs there, they were called Alep. Now, in Kazakh language, Alep means something a bit different, giant people. Alep in Kazakh is a strong man. Candidate of Historical Sciences, Professor, Chief Researcher of the Institute of History and Ethnology, named after Walykhanov, Arman Jumadil, told us about the importance of Batyrs to society at that time.
Вот есть такой институт батырства.
There was a social institution, Batyrism. It was complete only amongst the Kazakh people. Batyrs were an entire category, a non-hereditary social category. The title had to be earned. These were professional warriors who were supposed to supply troops with weapons and hire soldiers, while performing other special functions in the peacetime. Batyrs had an unspoken role. They had to be a bit of a Robin Hood. One would distribute his hunting prey and his combat trophies to his people, leaving only a little bit for himself. This is another confirmation that just strength and valor were not enough to become a real Batyr. Candidate of Historical Sciences, Suragan Rahmetullah, currently lives and works in Astana. But he was born, grew up, and graduated in Mongolia. For many years, he studied Batyrs, their lives, achievements, and marks in the history of different states.
Жалпы батырлар тарихы дегенimiz қазақтың тарихымен өзектес. Біздің тарихымыздың көбі батырлар тарихы.
The history of the Batyrs is connected with the history of the Kazakhs. Most of our stories are about Batyrs. Therefore, research and study of the history of Batyrs and the life of these heroes is a part of our life. Starting from Spartacus, Western Europe and the East had the Batyrs and heroes. And we have many legendary people as well. If we look back in time, we can see that the Batyr stories has been reduced to ideology. To get rid of this approach, in the 90s, the popularization of Batyrs became one of the tendencies in all democratic countries. Therefore, the Kazakhs are always looking for their Batyr. I've traveled around the world a lot, and when it comes to street naming, things in Kazakhstan are a bit different compared to, let's say, Australia or America. Here, most, I would say even all streets, avenues, or boulevards are named after a famous person, be it a politician, a writer, a poet, or a cosmonaut. For example, now I'm on Gogol Street, a famous Russian/Ukrainian writer. However, the person we're going to be talking about today, his name you probably would not find on any street sign in the world. The 20th century was full of hardships and tragedies for the Kazakh people. We know about the events that took place on the territory of Kazakhstan. However, what happened at the time beyond the Altai Mountains is often shrouded in secrecy. But there were plenty of courageous warriors who fought for the freedom of their people. Ospan Batyr was one of their leaders.
Это последние казахские батыры.
They were the last Kazakh Batyrs, and they fought for the independence of the Kazakhs in eastern Turkestan.
Туркестана, и его сравнивают как раз деятельность, как его образ.
He could be compared to Che Guevara. He was the same type of fighter, an ardent revolutionary, embodying Batyr's code of honor.
Кодексом батырской чести.
There are disputes between historians over the details of Ospan Batyr's life, but undoubtedly he was a courageous warrior and an influential diplomat. Jibek Joly, the author of a biographical book about Ospan Batyr, wrote, Ospan Batyr was an outstanding man who fought for the freedom of the Kazakh people. At one point, he had a direct or indirect impact on the lives of the people of the Soviet Union, the United States of America, Mongolia, and China. The governments of these countries reckoned with Ospan Batyr's opinion. The way he managed to shake international relations shows us that this was not an ordinary man. This was a real Batyr. Ospan Batyr, for example, wasn't huge. He wasn't broad-shouldered. No, he was a tactician. He was brave. He went against the system. He stood for his people, and he was not afraid. Even when they executed him, he wasn't bothered, because he knew what he was fighting for. This is the character of a real Batyr. And it so happened that this information was not available to the general public for a long time. Who knows what details of those events we have yet to learn. Oh, there are many of them. We once talked to one of the historians, and he told a lot of names that, for one reason or another, were tabooed. It was impossible to talk about them. Someone didn't like something about them. Mostly comes from the government. It was not acceptable, they stopped talking about it. You shouldn't have talked about it. Ospan Batyr was one of the leaders of the national liberation movement of Turkic people in northern Xinjiang and Jungaria. According to historical information, he was born in 1899 in the Onigara Winta encampment in the Koktokai county of the Altai prefecture of the Qing Empire.
Оспан Батыр — это середина 20 века, когда великие
Ospan Batyr lived in the middle of the 20th century, when Stalin and the great powers decided to hand over East Turkestan to Mao Zedong. It is a different question what their motives were, but when Xinjiang and East Turkestan became a province of China, the war started there. What did Ospan Batyr have to do with it? He fought not only for the independence of the Kazakh people who lived there, but also for the Uyghurs and other ethnicities. People throughout Xinjiang supported him in his struggle for independence. Ospan Islamoli, as you probably understood, was very much against the Soviet regime. He was very familiar with the situation in Soviet Kazakhstan, considering the fact that the members of the white movement and refugees from Kazakh villages actually lived in China. A source says that one day, realizing the ultimate goal of the Soviet leadership, he said, "As long as I live under the skies, I will never accept any citizenship, especially the Chinese one." Ayaan Adin, author of historical essays, described our hero with the words that sound the same as those that praised Batyr centuries ago. He had only one goal in life, the struggle for his homeland. For him, everyone who gave a single bad glance at his native steppe was an enemy. For the sacred land of his ancestors, he opposed China, Mongolia, and even the Soviet Union. And when it was necessary to find the common ground, he negotiated on his own terms. Ospan Batyr said, "For the sake of a single Kazakh, I am ready to make a deal with the devil himself."
Шығыс Түркістан ұлт-азаттық қозғалысы бұл 20 ғасырдағы ең үлкен қозғалыс. Егер ең үлкен қозғалыс болатын болса, бұл қозғалыстың басқасында кім жүрді десе?
The East Turkestan National Liberation Movement is a big movement of the 20th century. If this is the largest movement, then Ospan Batyr Islamoli was its commander-in-chief.
Тарихтағы Латимирден бастап өте көптеген
Ospan Batyr Islamoli is a phenomenon of the 20th century. Starting with Owen Latimore, he's been talked about by a lot of historians.
41 жылы атқа мінген, 1951 жылы көкек айының
He was born in 1899. In 1941, he set his struggle off.
осы кезеңдегі
On April 29, 1951, he died at the hands of the Chinese authorities. He was one of the most important historical figures of that time.
ортасында Шығыс Түркістан ұлт-азаттық қозғалысы
He was the biggest figure in the history of the uprising of East Turkestan, 1941-1951.
атсалысты.
He took part in the creation of the state in the East.
Сондықтан Кеңестер одағының тұсында Сталинмен
He was one of the leading figures on the international scene who worked closely with Stalin, with the Kuomintang government, with Mongolia, and with the new Chinese state since 1949.
республикасымен де байланыс жасаған халықаралық деңгейдегі ең үлкен тұлғалардың бірі деп.
Why do we call him an important figure?
Қалай
Why, during the time of the national liberation movement of East Turkestan, he was famous all over the world. But as soon as he carried out his mission, we never heard of him.
бір аз уақыттарынан
I think these are all the games of the Soviet Empire.
бұл қалай кетіп қалды деген мәселе тұр да. Бұлардың барлығы бұл үлкен империя, кеңестік империяның ойынына қатысты дүниелер деп ойлаймын.
Ospan Batyr's political views and how he defended them caused a terrible tragedy. In his first battle in 1940, the soldiers of Ospan liberated Koktokai from Chinese troops. But after some time, Chinese army returned. They started a bloody massacre in Ospan's village. 8 of his 11 children were slaughtered and thrown in the well. In May, Ospan's wife managed to save 3 children in the Black Irtysh River. The name of Ospan Batyr isn't the only one not mentioned by historians. Decades. We have yet to learn the biographies of many brave heroes. Many heroes were found to be unjustly forgotten or slandered.
Зұлқа Батыр Сәбитұлы 1929 жылы Қытайлар тарапынан бас алынған тұлға. Бұл
Zuha Batyr is the hero who was beheaded by the Chinese troops in 1929.
Еркіндік үшін, жер үшін өзінің басын құрбанға шалды.
He sacrificed his life for the freedom of the Kazakh land. And Batyr Sabituli wasn't the only one. After him and before him, a lot of Kazakh patriots were decapitated. The head of Batyr is in Mongolia now. Some Chinese author has written a very good novel about Batyr. The descendants of Batyr live in Germany, Turkey, and the USA. They collect materials about his life. Surely this is very important for Kazakh history. At the end of the 19th century, Tsarist Russia and the Qing dynasty split the Kazakh steppe, marking their borders. Since that time, there were Chinese Kazakhs and Russian Kazakhs. On the world map, this frontier became known as Xinjiang or Xinjiang, and later it began claiming a regional status. The most productive period for the national liberation movement in East Turkestan was from 1940 to 1946. Ospan Islamoli got in touch with Stalin and asked him for weapons. He fought with the Kuomintang government and defended the territory of eastern Turkestan. He then enjoyed great success. At Stalin's behest, they held many meetings on the Mongolian border in 1944. Now, one of the most important published sources on Ospan Batyr is the book that is called Otan Ushin Sokan Jerek, which means the heart that beats for the homeland. The author of the book, Mongolian general Batyn Dorj, devoted his work to the meeting between Ospan Batyr and Choibalsan, the leader of Mongolia. During a meeting with Choibalsan, Ospan was told that a paramilitary group had been railed in Mongolia to help the rebels, and a provisional independent government of the Altai Kazakhs had also been formed. Ospan was awarded the title Batyr Khan. Later, there were rumors that he was raised on a white felt, just like a Han. At this time, the Chinese army began to prepare for war on the Soviet border. Ospan Batyr was instructed to oppose them with his squadrons. Together with Louis Zohan Air Force Division, he destroyed the enemy. At that time, Makernan was the US consul in Urumqi. Until 1950, he was close to Ospan Batyr and helped him in many ways. Ospan Batyr received weapons not only from Stalin, but also from the Western, the Eastern, and from the Chinese agents. This was pointed out in Makernan's notes. They are now held at the archives of the United States. Ospan Batyr died on April 29, 1951. And Makernan was shot on April 20th, 1950 in Tibet. During all that time, he sent reports to the American authorities. Douglas Makernan is believed to be the first CIA operative to die in the line of duty. His star is the first one on the memorial wall of Central Intelligence Agency headquarters.
From
1941 to 1945, Ospan Batyr was considered only a rural bandit. In 1946, Ospan Batyr's mission was sent to the Kuomintang and American representatives.
Ospan Batyrдың өзінің миссиясы бағытына, мүддесіне, мақсатына байланысты Гамидан үкіметіменен Америкаға қарай бұрылды. Сол кезден бастап тағы да бандит деген атақ
Then they started calling him a bandit again. Until 1990, the name of Ospan Batyr was wiped out of history and banned. It was politically motivated and denied a lifetime of an important political figure.
Ұйымдастырып келді. Бұл саяси астары бар, саяси үлкен тұлғаның барлық тарихи өмірін жоққа шығарды.
We know that Ospan Islamollah got married 3 times. His elder wife Nurkiza had 6 sons and 3 daughters with him. With the second wife Meme, he had 3 daughters. And with the third wife Bayan, he had a son and a daughter. 3 of the 6 Nurkiza's sons died during the national liberation movement of the Altai Kazakhs in China in 1940. His sons, Ziya, Oydala, and Kari, were killed in prison in 1943. 3 other sons, Sherdiman, Nigmetola, and Nabi, fought in each of the battles with their father. Galim Ordası, Museum of Rare Books, stores a unique work by the English journalist, writer, and political scientist Godfrey Elias, called Kazakh Exodus. It was published in 1956 in the UK. It tells the tragic story of the life of the Kazakh people of East Turkestan. The author describes thousands of Kazakh families leaving their native lands under pressure from Chinese nationalists. Godfrey Elias writes about the mass migration and the preceding events. In the chapter, The Arrest of Ospan Batyr, the author tells in detail about tragic circumstances that led to the arrest of the leader of the uprising. Ospan Batyr was shot in Urumqi on April 29, 1951. 2 years after the public execution, on February 12, 1953, his oldest son, Sherdiman, was able to bury his body, according to Muslim traditions, in the Koktagay district of Altai. There he rests to this day. In one of the biographical books, the hero's last words are quoted: "I am a criminal of whatever crime you find me guilty of. When I fought with my enemies, I didn't see them as Chinese, Russians, or Mongols. Whoever encroached on my feelings, religion, land, and people would be my enemy. I will never give up on this fight. I'm ready for the severest punishment you have in store for me."
Для нас Ospan Batyr, мы его ценим, оставим его.
For us, Ospan Batyr, we appreciate him. Let's set the political aspect aside. As a human being, he was a real Batyr. He was a successor of the heroic Batyr civilization, and this is very important.
Билік басындағы патриоттар ұлт азаттық үшінгі өзінің идеясы бар. Қазақтың патриоттары Ospan Batyr сияқты.
Nowadays, Kazakh patriots who are in power do not forget about great heroes like Ospan Batyr. He was a great man who will always be part of the history. The question of the popularization of the Ospan Batyr is therefore of great importance for Kazakhstan. Many books have already been published. There was a short film about Ospan Batyr. Moreover, streets are renamed in honor of Ospan Batyr. This is very important. I hope that in the future, all the heroes of the Kazakh national liberation movements, like Ospan Batyr, will receive appropriate recognition. People still remember the words about Ospan Batyr, the last Batyr of the nomadic Kazakhs. "My steed was ardent, but now he's shedding tears. I would have said a lot if only Ospan Batyr had been alive." These are the lyrics of Bukit Bai's song Oy Kaisha. And you know, I think it's not fair to call Ospan the last Batyr. Now, living in Kazakhstan, I'm convinced that these are great people and Kazakhstan will always have real batyrs. This is Daniel Besirin. It was Searching for Mystery, and I'll see you next time.